They didn't see her at first. Maybe it was because the chandelier light never reached the corner where she sat, or maybe it was because they didn't want to see her. She entered quietly, her steps nearly silent on the polished marble floor of the grand gala hall. No one held the door open, no camera turned to follow her. No murmurs of "who's that?" echoed through the gold-trimmed room. She was just there, like furniture, like shadow. Her uniform was old, so old the edges had frayed into a whisper of thread. The once bright insignia on her chest had faded into near-nothingness. The fabric bore the quiet ghosts of battles long forgotten by the news and the people who'd moved on. Her boots, too, told a story, scuffed, cracked, proud in their decay. She took her seat in the back row, furthest from the stage. A server passed and hesitated, then walked on. A couple at the nearby table nudged each other and smirked. One of them whispered, "Did she sneak in?" The room was filled with prestige. Polished silver nameplates gleamed under crystal lights, announcing the presence of high-ranking officials, tech billionaires, defense contractors, and legacy generals, men with medals that outshone the chandeliers, women in silk gowns worth more than cars. Conversations floated around her, all laughter and legacy. And there she sat, alone, no entourage, no nameplate, no drink. Her hands rested gently on her lap, and her gaze stayed fixed on the stage, where the evening's tribute to great architects of peace and power was about to begin. She didn't flinch when the whispers grew louder. Outdated. Is that real? Probably delusional. She's mocking the uniform. They didn't know her. They didn't want to. To them, she was an error in the room's perfection, an eyesore, a relic, a ghost. But she didn't move, didn't look away. Her posture was straight, almost military, yet not forced. She wasn't pretending. She was remembering. Her fingers subtly traced the outline of a small patch on her left sleeve. It was nearly invisible now, worn by time and weather, but she knew every thread. She could feel it like a scar dot in the sea of glitter and champagne. No one saw the storm behind her eyes. Until the music changed. A trumpet sounded. A voice on the mic said, "Ladies and gentlemen, please rise to welcome tonight's guest of honor." The doors opened again, and everything changed. They didn't stop whispering. If anything, her presence became more offensive as the ceremony progressed. A nearby table leaned in, their conversation no longer hidden. "Look at that patch. What is that? It doesn't even exist. I checked Black Falcon Division. Never heard of it. Probably fake. Maybe she's one of those conspiracy veterans. She's dangerous or disturbed." The whispers crawled across the room like insects under silk. The most polite guests merely frowned. Others took it further, snapping discreet photos with their phones, sharing them silently, letting the image of the mystery woman go viral before the event even ended. The comments flooded private group chats. "Who let her in? Is this some protest? She's mocking our real heroes." And yet she didn't speak. Not one word. Her eyes remained on the stage, as if the swirling poison around her didn't exist, as if she were watching something far more important than the rich men giving speeches or the digital light shows celebrating military-industrial breakthroughs. Then came the uniform, the real subject of their mockery. It was an artifactal drab, thick-fibbered, and built for harsh terrain, not elegance. The color had dulled to an almost gray-green, and the name tag had long since been scraped off. But the medals, that's what disturbed people most. They weren't standard. Not the polished chrome stars or clean bronze crosses they all knew. No. Hers were older, hand-forged, engraved with symbols no longer used. Some had no national insignia. Some were blackened by fire or dulled by sand and sweat. They weren't decorations. They were memories. "None of those are in the system," whispered a young officer, eyes narrowed. "Either they're counterfeit or classified." Another voice, older and heavier with power, responded without looking her way. "If they're classified, then she shouldn't be wearing them." And that was the consensus across politicians, tycoons, and even a few old soldiers. She was a puzzle, but one they'd already decided didn't deserve solving. Still, something about her presence clung to the room. A discomfort, a tension, like a storm forming in the distance that no one wanted to acknowledge. A woman in a red dress approached her, wineglass in hand. Her tone was sweet, but the sugar was poison. "Excuse me," she began, fake smile bright. "You might be in the wrong section. This area is reserved for verified attendees." The seated woman turned her head slowly. Her eyes met the stranger's. There was no anger, no shame, just depth. The kind of gaze that made the woman in red step back without realizing. "I'm exactly where I need to be," the woman said softly. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't even defiance. It was certainty. And for a second it was more unsettling than rage. The woman in red blinked, nodded stiffly, and walked away, her facade cracking as she returned to her table, murmuring something about mental evaluations. Meanwhile, two security officers had begun to whisper near the back. One had a tablet, scrolling through guest logs. The other stared at the woman, hand resting lightly on the handle of a small radio. They hadn't found her name. And then, just as one of them took a step forward toward her, the trumpet sounded again. The room stilled. The announcer's voice rose above the discomfort. And now please welcome our distinguished honorary billionaire strategist, architect of modern warfare, CEO of Dominion Defense, General Donovan Marquez. Applause erupted. People rose, cameras turned, a door opened, and down the long aisle walked the most decorated man in the country. Tall, silver-haired, draped in ceremonial black. Each medal on his chest gleamed like it had been kissed by fire. He walked with gravity, with power, with the weight of every war he'd won. And as he moved through the room, he looked, as expected, at the admirers, at the generals, at the powerful until he saw her. The general had taken only 5 steps into the hall when he saw her. He froze at first. Most guests thought he'd paused for effect, a theatrical entrance. After all, Donovan Marquez was known for his command not just of armies, but of attention. He could command a crowd with a glance, manipulate silence like a weapon. So when he stopped walking, cameras zoomed in. Applause softened into murmurs. But Donovan didn't smile, didn't wave, didn't lift his hand in acknowledgement of the standing ovation. Instead, his eyes locked on the woman seated in the back, still in that faded, unholy uniform. The one everyone had dismissed, ridiculed, whispered about, and his face changed. It wasn't recognition, it was disbelief. His jaw tightened, his posture lost its ceremonial stiffness, the rhythm of his breath faltered. One of his aides stepped forward, concerned. "General, is everything all right?" But he didn't answer. He took another step, then stopped again. The crowd's curiosity turned sharper. Aides exchanged glances. The photographers lowered their cameras, unsure of the moment's nature. Something was wrong, something real. Because the general's lips were moving. Just barely. He was whispering to himself. The mic didn't catch it, but the closest guests did. It can't be. His eyes didn't waver. They remained locked on the woman no one else had dared to look at twice. The announcer tried to regain control. "Ladies and gentlemen, General Marquez has returned tonight too." But Donovan raised a hand, silencing him, and then he began to walk. Not toward the podium, not toward the reserved seats or the donors' table. He turned, deliberately, and began to walk down the aisle, straight toward the woman in the back. Each step echoed louder than applause ever had. Gasps filled the space between footsteps. People turned, following his gaze. Others stood on tiptoe, straining to see what had paralyzed the most powerful man in the room. And still she did not move. She remained seated, hands folded, eyes calm. If she was surprised, she didn't show it. If she felt the weight of every stare shifting toward her, she bore it like a woman who had stood in worse. Donovan slowed as he approached her. His stride lost its command, his shoulders lowered slightly. By the time he stood in front of her, the gala was dead silent. He looked down at her uniform, at the patch, at the medals, and his voice, when it came, was cracked by something no war had. The room no longer breathed. It watched. Every eye was on the man kneeling, and every heartbeat hung on the woman who had not moved. A general, worth billions, a strategist of modern empires, a man who had stood before kings and presidents. Now, on one knee, before a woman in a uniform that didn't officially exist, and she still hadn't said a word. Donovan Marquez kept his eyes low, not in shame but in reverence, in recognition, in disbelief that, after all these years, she was still alive, still here, still carrying the weight that the world had buried. He raised one hand slowly, not to touch her, but to gesture to the patch on her chest. "I remember the mountain," he said, his voice quieter now, as if telling a secret no one else could hear. "You were standing between us and hell." He looked up. "They said you were dead." The woman's eyes finally moved from the stage to his face. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. But something passed through her expression, something too deep for the room to understand. A memory, a reckoning. Her voice, when it came, was soft but firm, and every syllable carried the weight of a forgotten war. "They needed us to be dead." Whispers tore through the audience. Some leaned in, desperate to make sense of what was unfolding. Others pulled out their phones, recording the impossible. Somewhere near the press section, a journalist began scribbling furiously into a notebook, her hands shaking. Donovan remained on one knee. "The Black Falcon division was real," he said aloud, turning to face the audience now. "We were sent where no one else could go. We did what no one else would admit. We lost people. Good people. Heroes." He turned back to her. "She led us. She saved us. More than once. And when it was over, when they shut it all down, she stayed silent. They erased her. Erased all of them." The woman's eyes returned to the stage, but her voice carried now. "Some wars never end," she said. "They just become shadows." A woman in uniform at the front, a major, highly decorated, stood from her seat, her face pale, her voice tight. "That unit. It's not in any archive." Donovan didn't flinch, because they made sure of that. He rose slowly now, his knees stiff, but his stance strong. They wanted a legend they could control. The real story was too inconvenient. The major took a step forward. "Who authorized the mission? Who buried the record?" But Donovan didn't answer, because this wasn't a press conference. This was a reckoning. He turned to the woman again. "Why did you come tonight?" Her gaze dropped to the stage wall where a series of etched names glimmered under spotlights. A memorial meant to honor the fallen heroes of the past 20 years. She pointed to one. It was a name no one recognized. No rank, no title, just R. Velez. He never came home, she said. Tonight's about him, not me. That silenced even the press. Donovan nodded slowly. His voice, when he spoke again, was steadier. Then let's make sure no one ever forgets him or you. He turned back to the room suddenly. Not a general, not a billionaire, but a man carrying the truth like a banner. This woman, this commander, served with honor. Her name, and the names of her division, belong on that wall. There were no more whispers now. Just silence. Heavy, loaded silence, and from somewhere near the back, a voice broke through. A veteran, old, scarred. His voice cracked with time. I remember the Falcons. He stood up. No fanfare, no drama, just truth. Then another voice joined. I served under her command. Then another. I saw her pull a soldier out of burning wreckage with her bare hands. The room had shifted. No longer a gala. It had become a courtroom for history, and the verdict had begun to echo. It was as if the dam had cracked. One by one, voices rose from the corners of the room. Men and women who had been silent for decades, faces hardened by time, by battle, by the unspoken. I was with her in the mountains of Korra, said a man with silver in his beard and fire in his eyes. She saved an entire convoy. We were ambushed, no air support. She held the ridge alone until we could evacuate. I watched her carry 2 wounded through enemy lines, whispered another, trembling. No radio, no maps, just instinct and courage. She ordered us to leave her behind, said she'd hold the tunnel until the last truck passed. She didn't just command us, she believed in us. She made us believe in ourselves. The crowd, once smug and polished, had turned breathless. Heads spun to follow each confession, each tribute. Security officers stepped back, unsure of their role now. One of them, barely 25, lowered his tablet and stared at the woman as if seeing her for the first time. Donovan Marquez had moved aside. The stage no longer mattered. The spotlight was no longer his. It belonged to her. The woman stood now, slowly, deliberately, and the room adjusted, as if the gravity had shifted. She wasn't tall, she wasn't loud, but she carried herself like a mountain moves inevitable. Unshaken, the same woman they had mocked, ridiculed, ignored, and now they could barely meet her gaze. She looked at Donovan. You were a boy when we met. Green, reckless. You didn't even know how to read a terrain map. He smiled faintly. You taught me, you taught all of us. You didn't need a teacher, she said. You needed someone to believe you were worth teaching. It wasn't sentiment, it was truth. That's what stunned them most. There was no performance here, no bitterness, just memory and meaning. A reporter, bold enough to find her voice, stepped forward with a trembling hand. Ma'am, your name. The woman turned to her. Eliza Cortez. The name didn't ring bells in most minds, but for those who remembered, it shook something loose. The same reporter, whispering now, checked her device. There was no file, no official record. Your unit, they called us the Black Falcon Division, Eliza said. But officially, we didn't exist. She stepped toward the wall of names, the memorial, the stage meant to honor those recognized by the system. She touched the name again. R. Velez, my second in command. We called him Viper. He never made it out of Sangora. They left his body there, and then they erased him. She looked back at the crowd, and when they erased him, they erased all of us. A ripple moved through the room. Donovan stepped forward once more. His voice was steady, now charged with purpose. Ladies and gentlemen, what you saw tonight wasn't an accident. It was history trying to correct itself. He turned to Eliza. Let me bring your story forward. Let the world hear it. I can offer you a role, a foundation in your name, a home, a platform. But Eliza shook her head slowly. I came for him, she said, nodding to the memorial. I didn't come for recognition or redemption. I didn't come for comfort. Donovan's voice lowered. Then what do you want? She paused. Let the silence speak first. Respect, she said, and not just for me. For all of them. The forgotten, the erased. The ones who didn't come back, and the ones who did but were told they didn't count. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was sacred. And then she stepped away from the wall, and from the general, and walked quietly back to her seat where she had first been invisible. Only now, no one could look away. The cameras were still rolling, but no one was directing them anymore. There was no script for this. No teleprompter could capture what had just unfolded. The speeches prepared for the evening were quietly folded and placed under plates. The gala's luxurious buffet sat untouched, and at the center of it all, the woman they'd ignored had changed everything without raising her voice, without demanding anything but truth. In the hours that followed, the story spread like wildfire, but not the official story. Not the carefully curated headlines or the glowing press releases about alliances and defense. Budgets, no. The story people whispered about in corridors, typed into encrypted messages, and murmured into satellite calls across time zones, was hers. Commander Eliza Cortez, Black Falcon, erased but not forgotten. She hadn't spoken much after returning to her seat. She didn't need to. The room had already been flipped inside out. People approached her now with the hesitation of pilgrims nearing a shrine. Some offered apologies, others asked for stories. A few just stood nearby in silence, unsure what to say to someone who had once been a ghost, and now stood more alive than anyone in the room. Donovan remained nearby, but respectfully silent. He'd become a student again, listening. Eventually, one of the journalists managed to ask the question on everyone's mind. Why did you disappear after everything? Eliza looked at her, eyes soft but unflinching. Because when they disbanded my unit, they didn't just take away our medals, she said. They took our names, our pasts, our future benefits. They made it clear speak up, and we'd face charges, lie, and they'd reward us with silence. She looked down at her uniform sleeve, the patch worn thin. I chose peace. Not because I didn't care, but because I couldn't trust the noise. A young woman, clearly military, barely 20, her dress uniform still crisp, stepped forward, voice shaking. But we need people like you. Why come now, after all these years? Eliza glanced again at the memorial wall. Because he deserves someone to say his name out loud. That answer hit harder than any declaration of revenge ever could. She hadn't come for vengeance, she had come for memory, and in doing so, she'd started something no billion-dollar campaign could have manufactured. She'd made people feel something real. The conversations began to shift, not just in the gala but outside, across bases, offices. Old veterans reached out to one another. Unmarked records were quietly requested. Journalists found threads and classified reports that didn't quite add up. And those who had spent years crafting a version of history that excluded her began to worry, because truth, once whispered loud enough, becomes impossible to bury. Donovan Marquez, for his part, knew this wasn't a moment he could control. It was bigger than him, bigger than any of them. He approached her one final time. That evening, now without pretense or formality. I can't erase what they did, but I can help the world see what they tried to hide. Eliza nodded, but her eyes didn't sparkle with triumph. There was no victory in being remembered after so much was lost. I don't need the world, she said. I just need one generation to ask the right questions. Donovan exhaled slowly, nodding. Then we start with this one. And so it began. A quiet revolution, not of politics, but of memory. Not of war, but of truth. The next day, the networks tried to reframe the event. They showed clips, they quoted Donovan, but no matter how they spun it, the image that traveled the world was not of him. It was of her standing solemn in a faded uniform beside a name on a wall the world had once overlooked. Commander Eliza Cortez. Not asking to be seen, just refusing to be forgotten. It didn't take long for the story to detonate beyond the walls of that gala. Within 48 hours, news anchors across the world tripped over themselves trying to find the right tone. Was she a hero, a ghost, a secret the government had hoped would stay buried? And with each broadcast, one thing became clearer. They couldn't control the narrative anymore because the footage had gone viral. Not the official clips, not the statements carefully released by PR teams, but a shaky, raw video filmed by someone at the back of the room. It showed the moment Donovan Marquez, the billionaire general, dropped to his knees before a woman in a forgotten uniform. It captured the stunned faces, the silence, the surrender. People didn't just watch, they felt. The comments didn't ask for clarification. They demanded answers. Who is Eliza Cortez? Where is the Black Falcon division on our records? Why were they erased? Veterans came forward, quietly at first, then boldly. Messages poured into forums, encrypted channels, public posts. I saw her save an entire village when the mission was supposed to be recon only. They told us to deny her existence, but I kept the photos. My discharge papers warned me never to mention her name. I didn't understand then, now I do. And in response, the silence of the powerful grew louder until it cracked. The Department of Defense issued a brief, calculated statement. We are reviewing archival material related to the Black Falcon division and evaluating any oversight in historical record-keeping. But that wasn't enough, because people had already chosen what to believe, and this time, they believed her. Eliza didn't give interviews. She didn't sit for documentaries. She didn't accept Donovan's offer for a foundation or a national platform. Instead, she did something no one expected. She visited the families one by one. Quietly, without media, without announcements. She appeared at doorsteps in a uniform older than their memories, carrying no more than a single photograph or a folded note. She hugged mothers whose sons had died under her command. She sat on porches with fathers who had never been told the truth about what happened in Sagora or Tulik or the Ridge of Fire. Sometimes she left behind nothing but a small, blackened patch once worn on her own arm. And word of this spread to not through the media, but through reverence. People began to speak her name with a different tone, not in headlines, but in hush, not in outrage, but in honor. Meanwhile, Donovan acted. He ordered an internal review of every covert unit disbanded without record. He authorized the unsealing of files long buried under political chains. He paid, personally, to have the names of the fallen black falcons etched into a new section of the National Defense Memorial. But when he offered to dedicate a statue to Elisa, she declined. "Statues are for people who need to be seen," she said. "We were never built for that." He asked her what she wanted. Her answer was simple: truth in every classroom, in every textbook. Let them learn the whole story, not just the sanitized one. And so, quietly it began. A shift in military academies. Cadets were assigned to study not just the official campaigns but the erased ones. A new curriculum was approved, one that included the Black Falcon Division, not as a myth, not as a rumor, but as fact. Students wrote essays on leadership and sacrifice, quoting a woman who had once been invisible, and still Eliza didn't return to the spotlight. She moved further away, slipping into a quiet life on the outskirts of a forgotten town, near a forgotten battlefield where her brothers and sisters had once stood. She declined honors, but one thing she never declined: respect, because now it came freely, not from fear, not from fame, but from memory. But from memory once awakened, refuses to sleep again. 1 year later, the hall was quiet again, not for a gala, not for a celebration, but for a ceremony. This time, there were no performers, no glistening centerpieces or orchestras playing patriotic themes. The walls were bare, the lights dim, and yet the room was filled with more gravity than any event that had ever taken place there before. A single banner hung above the stage. It read, "Honor Reclaimed." At the center of the room stood Donovan Marquez, older, slower, but stronger in a way no war medal could replicate. He stepped to the podium, cleared his throat, and looked out over the seated guests, many of whom were veterans, historians, and family members who had traveled across states, borders, decades just to be here. "This ceremony," he began, "is not about rewriting history, it's about restoring it." No applause, just silence, respectful waiting. "Tonight we add a name to the memorial wall, a name long overdue, a name denied by bureaucracy, but remembered by blood." He turned, slowly, and pulled a cloth from a new plaque affixed to the wall, etched in steel, framed in black, "Commander Eliza Cortez, Black Falcon Division, 1972. Her silence carried more weight than our speeches ever could. For a long moment, no one moved. Then, slowly, people rose to their feet. No music played, just silence, the kind of silence that doesn't need to be filled. Later, Donovan stood in his office alone. Behind him, the city flickered under the weight of nightfall. The wars were quieter now. The politics had shifted, but his gaze was locked on one item on his desk, a frame, simple, square, inside a tan-old fabric patch, faded green and black, the edges frayed by time and battle, the insignia barely visible that had once sat on her sleeve. It had weathered mountains, fire, blood, and now it sat behind glass, surrounded not by gold, but by silence. He didn't touch it. Didn't need to, because it wasn't just fabric. It was a symbol of a time no one dared speak of a leader no one was supposed to remember, of a division that wasn't supposed to exist, but now they would never be forgotten again. And as he turned off the lights in his office, the glow of the memorial wall across the city remained bright, unyielding, eternal, not because of power, not because of money, but because one woman had the strength to show up and stay silent. And in that silence, the world was forced to listen. You watched it happen. A room full of power, brought to silence by a woman no one had invited. A name, once erased, now carved in steel, and all because she chose to show up with nothing but truth stitched into a faded sleeve. Now it's your turn. Look deeper at what we choose to forget, at who we choose to ignore. How many more Eliza Cortezes walk among us, unnoticed? How many stories were buried, simply because they weren't convenient? Tell us, what would you have done if you were in that room? Would you have stood when she walked in? Would you have spoken when everyone whispered? Leave your answer in the comments. Let your words be the voice history tried to silence, because when one story like this rises, more follow. And at Billionaire Curve, we don't just tell stories for views, we resurrect the ones money tried to bury. Share this video with someone who still believes in honor, in memory, in truth, and remember, it only takes one voice to shift a room, but it takes all of us to rewrite the past.